about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
To infinity and beyond!
Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?
It's classified.
You talking to me?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I can't fly!
Expecto Patronum!
Entertainment X.
You never know what you're going to get.
For this episode, I dive even deeper with Townsend Teague. We talk about important good business principles. We talk about the future of the Broadway community, common pitfalls and mistakes of Broadway shows, and how he cultivates his findings of people he wants to work with, also setting goals. So this is a really in-depth conversation that there's a lot of takeaways from it. He also gives an outstanding book list at the end of this episode. So grab your notebook and your pen or pencil because there are a lot of takeaways. Enjoy. And we are back with Townsend Teague. Townsend, thanks for sitting down with me a second time.
It's my pleasure, Clay.
We had so much we talked about the first time, and there was questions that there's questions I didn't get to ask. So we're gonna do a round two, my first round two. I really appreciate
we're doing it.
Doing this round
Here
two.
we are, round two.
So we've talked about everything up to moving into the city, more or less, up to date.
Pretty much.
So we're gonna hit on some more or less 5 or 6 big points here today.
Okay.
About business, good business, bad business, and
okay.
business.
Well,
otherwise.
I don't know anything about bad business.
Oh, yeah. Okay, never mind. We won't talk about that. So I want to talk about startup companies, and I want to talk about your involvement, things you've learned from working with them.
Yep.
And maybe we can end it with a little bit of, for this first point, advice for someone who wants to start something, doesn't know how, doesn't know where to begin. And that's with the conversation, though, particularly of technology need investors, something along those lines. But anything that comes out, I'm sure will be gold.
Yeah.
So,
put
that
very,
on you.
You're kind. You're kind. Those are, to me, those are different questions inside of that one question.
Great.
Different questions to me. It's how do you start a company, a startup company? That's a very different question than how do you discover a company that has already been started that you want to be a part of, and why would you even do that in the first place? So, my experience is the latter. It's the discovering startups that I want to be a part of and why, and then fast forward to present day, it's founding companies and the ability to do that just in what I'm comfortable with, after having been around the process for a while with other individuals' companies. Does that make sense at all?
That does. And my first question that comes to mind is, how do you find?
Okay, so for me, the first company that I invested in that was a quote-unquote startup company was in 2011. Now, at that time, I'm on tour as a company manager, and I'm really feeling like, I've been in the Broadway space now for 10 years, and I'm in this incredible, awesome industry, but also recognizing that I'm also kind of in a bubble because, regardless of the show I'm working on, we're using similar methodologies and, how we bring a show to market, how we communicate it to internal staff, investors, marketing agencies, and what have you to eventually take it to the stage. And I really started thinking to myself, I am learning an incredible amount about how to do the business of Broadway, but what am I missing anything? Are there things that I don't know that could add value to who I am as a person contributing to the industry, and maybe even in a wilder sense could add value to across the industry, and that's that's a larger statement, but so for me, it was, I want to find companies that are not in my industry. That was my journey, that I could invest in and learn from through that process. Okay. And so it's what are, I'll just give you an example. And I don't remember if we touched on this in the last episode, but I'll just throw it out there. So the first company that I invested in was a wine company that was using technology to have a direct conversation with consumers, which is, a quicker discovery process of not having like kind of a supply chain of how you can speak to the eventual buyer. Now, what does that mean? So it's incredibly risky, but a company says, well, what we want to do in the wine business is we recognize that in the wine industry, there are traditions that have been locked into supply chains that are over a century old. And I go, oh, well, that sounds kind of familiar. There are landholders that own land, that some of them grow their own grapes and some lease to people that are actually renting the land to create their own wines. I'm like, well, okay, that kind of also has some parallels with the theater industry, like, real estate and creatives come in to like make their show, make the wine. And then there's a huge problem with kind of, I guess, perceived like snobbery in the wine industry, that it's this luxury purchase. And, if you've ever been out at a date and the sommelier comes up and he's asking you about the wines you like, God forbid you don't know your stuff and then you just feel like an idiot at the table, and it comes at a high price point. So it's like a luxury thing. And it's like, all these things like, well, let's think about what this wine company is trying to do in their industry. And in the Broadway space, we're over a century old. We have a supply chain of how shows go to market that's very established and it's hard to get into. We have kind of, a like who can afford to buy tickets for $160? What kinds of people can access that? Again, I'm talking about Broadway. And then also as Broadway producers, we can't talk to our ticket buyers because Telecharge and Ticketmaster, don't share information with producers and general managers about who the heck their buyers are. And the wine industry, you go, it leaves the vineyard and then eventually is going to go through about 5 steps before that bottle of wine is in a store, and everybody's got to get paid along the way. And then you don't get feedback until your sales cycles, right? So you don't have real-time feedback. So what this company wanted to do is they wanted to go online. They wanted to own their labels so that they could kind of control their destiny, and have direct correspondence with their buyers. And so what they did is instead of being like, like our wine is great and let us tell you all this stuff, you start with a palate profile that says, do you like coffee? Do you like sweet? Do you like the taste of mushrooms? Are you like with food? Are you conservative, like play it safe, or are you adventurous, like to try new things? All of that informs things so that as you begin buying wine, there's an algorithm that can be looking at your preferences versus what you get. Then you rate what you get, and then it learns from you and can recommend to you. So I look at, Netflix, what they're doing, and they're tagging all of their shows so that they can understand what you're watching and what the similarities are so that they can have a recommendation engine. And this wine company is effectively, they are tagging all the bottles of wine with data points so that the machine algorithms can then go, well, these are the things that make up what this person enjoys, and these are the things that they don't like. And so why do I want to do that? Well, there's a heck of a lot that we can learn from that in the Broadway industry. And then not even talking about fundraising yet, which is huge, is that there's not a lot of transparency on the expense side of Broadway shows to investors. And I will tell you, with any venture capital backed company that's a startup company, they are asked every question that potential investors want to ask, and they answer the questions to the most part, in my experience. And it's a really healthy demonstration of, we want to tell you everything we know. And if we don't know the answer, we're going to tell you, and then we're going to go find out the answer because we're eager to move the needle forward so that our company can be successful, our consumers can have a great experience. So that's my very long answer in one example of why do I look for, startup companies to invest in that are not in the industry. And at this point now, we're half a dozen in that are, not in our industry, that I can learn from and go, well, how can I use that in Broadway? So to be clear, I am always asking myself, how can I use that in the Broadway space? What can I learn about? What does it mean to put together pitch decks? What should your slides look like? How do you want to demonstrate that, there's a problem, there's an opportunity, this is what we believe the solution is, and then be able to speak to all of those points and have the willingness to, go into a room over and over and over again and listen to people give you critical feedback so that like the good stuff rises to the top.
Yeah.
So that's my journey from like 2011 when I'm 10 years into the Broadway industry to today, where starting in 2017, at the end of 2016, kind of in like end of the third quarter of 2016, I said, I think that I've learned enough to be able to start doing this in the Broadway space now. So let's either one, go find entrepreneurs in the Broadway space that I believe can do things that really help our industry. And then in addition to that, I have ideas of my own. So let me get people around those ideas, fund those ideas so that I can develop them, hopefully for the betterment of the industry. And again, I think we may have touched on this in episode 1, but these are not shows. These are like really exciting to me, but potentially boring to, people that their interaction with Broadway is the shows, but we are in desperate need of. We have all these mom and pop organizations that we could probably cut 20 hours a week off of our work week if we figured out ways to do things in a more streamlined, uniform fashion. And the company managers and the general managers, and you watch producers, they tend not to grow their office space even when they have a large product pipeline. And the reason for that is you don't know what next season's going to be like. And so if you've taken out the rent on, a large office because things are going well, you can have, a couple of shows closed and then it's like, oh, we're in trouble here.
You bring up a good point there, because I noticed that.
By the way, thanks for hopping in, because that, I think I can't. How many minutes was that I just ranted?
That was 8 minutes straight. 8 minutes straight. But it's all good stuff. I mean, come on. Okay, yeah. So they do have small offices, and I noticed that. You're right, because you don't know what the future holds. With these companies or some of these ideas, we're going to have a better idea of what the future holds. Hopefully. I mean, that would be ideal.
Well, we have to. I mean, for the betterment of everyone. Or what happens if we don't?
Yeah. It would keep on going the way it's been going.
Yeah, or it would change in a way that, I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So how do you go about finding people you want?
Well, let me tell you. So I'm looking for ideas that are really big ideas that can be deployed industry wide across the entire Broadway landscape in both New York City, across North America, and potentially beyond. Yeah. And, so I'm looking for things that, we talked about Production Pro a little bit in the last episode, but if a technology platform that can allow individuals to no longer carry around large physical binders of what their show Bibles are, what does that do to our ability to be able to, one, share information in real time with our team, and two, bless you, if you've reached that point of success where you're working on a bunch of different shows, you're not now, traveling around with a bunch of binders or having to like run back home or to your office to switch out binders based on meetings you're in and whatnot. That you have all of your documentation of you have your script in your iPad, you have your scenic plot, your lighting plot, your costume Bible, your hair Bible, and they're all there at your fingertips. And with machine learning, what happens is we now can put in script 2, and that machine understands the differences between script 1 and script 2. Right. The costume designer, we can tag that, a costume belongs in, scene 12 that they are building, and the machine will move that into scene 12 so that it lives above the column of that scene, so that when you tap the box and you open it up, you now have the creative contribution of each of your designers living right there. And you can turn your iPad back and forth, and it switches from script to visual, script to visual. So for me, it's like, well, I know a heck of a lot of people, including myself, that would improve not only the number of hours we're working a day, but also our relationships. Because when you can't find the Bible, or you didn't know the Bible was finished, or you're lugging around stuff through Times Square, 20 pounds of binders, all of that creates pain points and friction. And I believe that when we can solve problems like the Bible problem, then we actually get to focus more on each other and our shows. That eventually then translates into a better experience for the people performing the show and working on the show and the audience. And so that's how large scale a thing like Production Pro is. And because it works for storytellers, and what I mean by that in the professional spaces, producers, production companies, and design teams that need to share information in real time, well, then you could also hypothesize that it will work in film, television, theme parks, cruise ships, really anywhere where those groups of people need to share information in real time, and a lot of them are traveling around.
So when you're connecting with people to create these new ideas, these new companies, these new things, are you reading newspapers? Are you scouring LinkedIn? Is there like any particular, I mean, I don't know if this is the special sauce of Mr. Teague.
So I may be wrong about this in the hours that I quote, but I think I read somewhere that Warren Buffett reads newspapers for like 5 hours a day.
Yeah. And
think to yourself, like, how could you be getting things done in your day if you read for 5 hours? Well, it's what we're looking for, and I'm using a we statement, is that I'm not reading for 5 hours, but I read a lot, and I read from a lot of places. And what happens is you start to identify correlations. You're pulling data points where you see similarities. When I'm reading something in like Broadway Briefing in the morning, it's, things are popping and resonating. Oh, I know 3 other companies that are working on that, or I know a company that's working in that space and it's not going well. And I believe that I know why, because I've interviewed people. And I'm reading things from financial resources, yes, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of that kind of stuff. And what happens is it pools together into, in my head, I can begin to, make assumptions rather quickly because I'm learning about a company from a lot of different sources. Right. So, like with Production Pro, for instance, that is not at all my creation. I have nothing to do with the design of it. But once I learned about what Alex Libby, the founder of Production Pro, wanted to do and was doing, he's a founder creator, then it's like, I believe in what he's doing, and I want to support that, both in terms of opening doors for introductions, bringing in potential strategic investors to the table to have conversations, and then also raising money on my own to take an ownership stake in the company so that I can be a part of their journey from a financial standpoint too. Yeah. So it's, what I want to do is when I bring money into a company, we then become financially aligned because our incentives are locked into succeed together or not succeed together. And that kind of contractual alignment, I think, is an important thing with people that are working together in that capacity.
Right.
But Alex, I had read about Alex in a couple different online sources, and in that particular example, what I do then is I look for an introduction through a mutual friend. And in this day and age, that introduction, or at least finding the mutual friend, because of LinkedIn and things like that, our opportunity to do that is really large. And so, I found someone that that knew Alex well, knew me well, and I asked, would you write an introductory email and say, Townsend's interested in your company, and then they can just leave it there. And then what I do is I don't say, I want to invest in your company, or I want to, anything like that. I'm really a relationship person first, because it's like dating. It's like accepting a job. It's like, what's this going to look like for me? if I, proceed on a journey with this person or this organization. And Alex and I were he's several years into the process, but it's really gotten big within, since last summer, I would say. And he and we're about 8 months into that journey together as of the end of March. And it's really exciting to watch an entrepreneur do the things that Alex is doing, because what he's contributing to the storytelling industry is significant for all the reasons that I've just pontificated about.
Okay, so before we move on to the next topic, you brought up something a few minutes ago about I don't know what I don't know. And I love that because that keeps you extremely self-aware as you go about creating pain points and friction and possible failures along the way. Kind of curious where that comes from. How do you keep yourself in check on that? Is there any thoughts or opinions you have more than I don't know what I don't know?
All right, let me give you an example. So today is April 30th, so it's the last day of a month. Today is a day for me that is reflective and forward thinking. Okay, so I have a whiteboard that I work on. What'll happen is it's not only is it the last day of this month, but it's also hopefully the last, it's cold out today. I wore a jacket over here, but we're also moving into a new season. Okay. And so for me, what I do to what don't I know, is I have on my calendar for today to, regardless of whatever's on my whiteboard. Now, anytime I wipe out my whiteboard, I take a photo of it, and I have in my Dropbox, all the photos of my whiteboard so that I can swipe through to see what was I thinking on this day or that day or whatever. Oh, wow. Okay, I can do that on the train, wherever I am. Yeah. At the end of the month, I will take a photo and then I will erase it clean, even if there was stuff that I want to keep on there. Yeah. And the first kind of question I ask myself is, what are the most important questions going into the next 30 days? And so that's good. What do I not know, or what do I not know that I don't know, as has been thrown out there, is I'm going to go through a process of I'm going to stare at that whiteboard, and I'm going to stare at the photo of what used to be the whiteboard and go all right, well, there's 6 things on here that I want to extract and put into May because they're going to stay present. Anything that's already happened doesn't get to be on the whiteboard anymore. That's something that already happened. So I don't need to see I accomplished those things to remind myself. They go away. They're done. And now I'm going to be asking myself, what is the most important question? Should I be this month meeting with more new people to expand my network? Or is it a time where this month I want to dedicate 30 days to circling back to people that I already know to, dig a little deeper and build a little bit more of a meaningful relationship around some specific things we're talking about? And I'll tell you, because I'm already thinking about this since I woke up this morning, that May for me will be mostly not new people, but will be about circling back to about 6 people and really, keeping them on my mind over the next 30 days, so that I can really kind of dig down further into those relationships. So I will usually I was speaking with someone that I was having coffee with recently. We were talking about eye contact, and they said, you're good with eye contact. And I said, thanks for noticing. And just so you know, that has not always been the case. It's practiced. Yeah. And I actually, before I walked into the coffee shop, said to myself quietly without speaking out loud, eye contact, to remind myself. But I might throw things like that up on my whiteboard, like eye contact. What is the most important question? Yeah. If you expect magic in every encounter, you'll certainly find it. Things like that, so that as you look at it and you're walking out, or as you're thinking about what don't I know, you, or rather I, can always be asking myself that question. So a really powerful thing is, let's say I'm at a weekly producer meeting, and the lead producer asks the question to the room, is there anything else I should know? That's one of the most powerful questions you can ask. It's not accusatory.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't know something. So it's also not revealing of, I don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
But it puts everybody in a position of, when I ask you, is there anything else I should know?
Yeah.
And I'm holding everyone at the table accountable. If there is something that someone is aware of at the table,
Speak up.
this is the
Yeah.
time. And if you don't, I have a right to circle back to you and say, when did you know this? Why didn't you bring this up? You know, like the group needed to, you know, would have benefited from being informed at that time, et cetera. So that's a way of asking, like, what don't I know?
Yeah.
And certainly having people around you that you trust that are resources that can, you know, help kind of get some answers to the top is, I find helpful.
Yeah. So real quick, the whiteboard, is it limited to how many questions you put up on it in reference of like what you want to accomplish within a month? Do you try to keep it like to 10 things or not really? It's just
I break it out into categories.
Okay.
And with like a 3-month timeline. So what I'll actually do is I'll draw out like May, June, July, and then underneath it, I'll like write the names of companies or people that I'm planning on speaking with or otherwise, you know,
associating with
during that time.
Okay.
And then I break out into what are venture capital things that I'm pursuing
Yeah.
that are, you know, not in the Broadway space. What are technology companies that I'm pursuing in the Broadway space? There's a company that I have founded that is a technology company that will eventually be in the Broadway space that I have, you know, what are the next 5 things that need to be done to move us towards whatever it is that we're doing after that. And then I also have a meetup list. So if I decide, like, if I'm reading a newspaper and I see a name and I'm like, I'd love to have coffee with that person, they go up on the meetup list. That way, every day when I look at it, it's a reminder of, oh, right, I need to find someone that knows that person so I can get an intro, and then I can meet them, and then, you know,
go from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I draw pictures and things like that, you know, like not detailed, but like, you know, just visual reminders or stuff like that.
Fascinating. And that keeps you on track. How long have you been doing that?
So the whiteboard I started doing daily on January 1st, 2018.
Okay.
Pretty recent, right?
Yeah.
So here's, you know, I had been around whiteboards and strategy sessions and things like that, but I decided, you know, I want a whiteboard in my apartment that like I see when I'm like passing through, you know, every day. And on December 31st, 2017, what I decided was I was like, you know, I'm like really excited about 2018 with some things that I'm, you know, pursuing. And I am going to, I was out of town on vacation, and I decided I'm going to fly home the morning of the 31st, because what I'm going to do for New Year's Eve is I am going to sit with my whiteboard, sit with a couple books, put the ball drop on in the background, and write out, what does 2018 look like for me? And what should the first 3 months look like? And then at midnight, I poured half a glass of champagne. I had it in my apartment, and then I went to bed. And I woke up and then started my year.
Oh, shoot.
No hangover, ready to go.
Yeah.
Agenda's sitting there. We're ready to go. But that's that. You know, I just decided they're always, you know, in the office, or you're visiting, you know, other companies and you're doing strategy sessions and things like this. And I was like, I want one that's only mine, that only belongs to what I'm doing.
Your mission.
That's
not
right.
The company's mission.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned you sat down with some books. Can I save those books for later in this conversation?
Absolutely.
We talk about the books?
Yep.
Okay, I don't want to lose that. Quick change of topic here. I read an article the other day about, what was it? I forget what the title was. I think it was something along the lines of Midwestern theater goers aren't as stupid as you think, or something like that. And they were discussing the fact that ticket sales are so low for SpongeBob, Margaritaville, Frozen, like they just cut their ticket prices down. And then you have the Hamiltons and the Dear Evan Hanses. And we touched on this a little bit in our last episode.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated and morbid curiosity if there's any opinions that come to mind on why those may not be doing so well. Particularly Frozen, because you would think that would be, I mean, I'm sure Disney's like, that's a surefire hit. Did they take too many liberties with it? And, was a filler. But is there anything that comes to mind with those?
Okay, so I'm hearing a demographic question about the Midwest. I'm hearing a ticket price question, which I'm happy to speak to as well. And I believe you're referring to an article in the New York Post that was out last week that talked about, those of us that have been in the industry will tell you that we can go to a show and say, or or you also have that moment where you're like, this is amazing, and the 15 plus years that I've been here, I believe what I've learned is we just ebb and flow. Yeah. It's ebb and flow. And so when you say, like that, and I'm not saying you, I'm thinking about this article that, because I read it too, that referenced, basically the stuff that's coming from big media that is, branded content, like SpongeBob, where, you have examples of things like that, which, by the way, I took my, 7-year-old nephew to, and he had a phenomenal time because he was allowed to behave like a child in the audience, which is rare for Broadway shows where we want people to behave and sit with their, hands on their lap until it's time to applaud.
Right.
But basically it's like, I read this and I don't throw a lot of stock into it because you go, they put up the money, they did the show, and the consumer, the people, you, me, families, whoever, everyone has a right to vote. And you vote with your dollars. And if you don't upvote the show, then the show can't pay their lease in the building, and they're eventually replaced by something that can, hold on a little bit longer, hopefully, and resonate with audiences. Yeah. I don't think that people from the Midwest and people that are, from, New York City or the East Coast or the West Coast, are, I'm trying to recall exactly the way that you put it, but I think that,
Yeah, it was a little crude.
Yeah, a little bit. And that's fine. I think the thing is, guess what? We're all entitled to like what we like.
Yeah. And
no one's allowed to tell us any different. And so, if Mamma Mia resonates with someone who's in the Midwest, but, kind of a traditionalist theater person sees that and goes, ugh, that's not my kind of theater. Totally fine. Totally fine. Who cares?
That's what it is.
But I think the bigger thing that we're talking about is, the ticket price drop, which when I say, you vote with your dollars, well, there's a couple things happening. One is that, we have the dip before summer. Okay. What happens is, after everyone leaves after, the winter holidays, it's a challenging point for any show that doesn't have a significant ticket sale advance. And February and March are challenging. And then you'll see like a 2-week pop in April, which is built around spring breaks all around the country that people are coming to the U.S. And then we're going to dip again until early summer when schools let out and families start returning to New York. So when you see the ticket prices drop, ask yourself 2 questions, or rather, for me, I'm looking at 2 different data points. Are we talking about that the actual primary box office is dropping ticket sales through their various channels, or are we talking about the secondary ticket market? Because when we talk about Disney, for instance, with Frozen, well, if you think a $60 million ticket sales advance is a bad thing, wow. I mean, what has happened there is specifically we're talking about organizations like StubHub that, that New York Post article, from what I remember, you have ticket resellers that go and buy large chunks of tickets to a show like Frozen, and then all of a sudden they figure out, oh, shoot, we can't sell these for $430 a pop. And so they drop the price. Okay. And so when an important part about looking at the secondary ticket markets is that tells you the true economic value of what people are willing to pay for a ticket regardless of the source, right? And so if people will pay $1,100 for a Hamilton ticket on the secondary market, then is it a bad thing that Jeffrey Seller says, I'm going to make my top ticket $8.99 so that my entire team, my investors, my creatives, and the people that actually work on the show can benefit from that financial success instead of just some third-party company that managed to get their hands on a lot of tickets and resell them to people. So, I think, SpongeBob, it's challenging, and we will see. Historically, getting nominated for awards, really the only awards that matter are the best category for a play in a musical. The best actor, best actress, I'm talking about in terms of like driving ticket sales, they really don't resonate, and nor does a nomination. It really is about winning that best musical, best play. And when you don't, there are really challenging conversations happening around the table about this thing that you love and have worked on for a long time that has a cash burn problem where, the thing about advanced ticket sales are that they're spread out over a period of time, and you can't record that as revenue until that night's show. It's recorded for accounting purposes as a receivable, okay? And if you can't get to the finish line, though, whatever that may be, you actually have to, you close and all that ticket money is returned to the ticket buyers. So that's why you see a show will release blocks of tickets, like 3 months at a time, 6 months at a time. What you don't want to do is release 12 months, and then now you have a $20 million advance over 12 months or a $10 million advance over 12 months, but it's spread out over 52 weeks, and you really need $600,000 to $800,000 a week to make sure that your Broadway show can meet its obligations and go to the next week. The only time that you can do something like what we saw, Harry Potter released to like May 2019 is because they have looked at their ticket sales and what their inventory is prior to that point and said, we're going to be okay. Let's go ahead and do that. But that's, that's an outlier, right? And you can see the investment up front for them to like build brand awareness and what they've done. But when we look at this season, when you look at the musical category of the 2018 Tony Awards, you have Frozen, you have Mean Girls, right? So these are both coming from large media companies. They are branded content. Then you have a show like The Band's Visit. Two opinions. One is that, should The Band's Visit win on artistic merit over Frozen and Mean Girls? So that's one question. And then what does it mean for the industry if The Band's Visit does or does not win Best Musical? When I say the industry, I'm also talking about the touring markets. When I say that winning the Best Tony Award is the most important thing, when The Band's Visit wants to do a national tour and the presenters around their country either will or will not have an opportunity to say to their local ticket buyers, this won the Best Tony. Now, let me ask you a question. When Frozen travels around the country, do you think they're going to have a problem having that conversation with or without the Tony? I don't think it matters at all. Disney is very effective at bringing their shows to markets around the country. Mean Girls is the kind of show that I think, when you think about, like Legally Blonde and Hairspray and those kind of category shows, it should have a great opportunity to tour the U.S. and then have the number of stock and regional and high schools and stuff that will do that. By the time that Hairspray eventually was released from its first class rights to be allowed to be licensed, I think it had somewhere between 3,500 to 4,000 license requests on hold, just waiting to do that show.
Right.
And so The Band's Visit, this beautiful, beautiful story that is it's like a book play that happens to have music and it's for adults. That's a harder thing to market position around the country. But if the industry validates it and says, this is the show, here's what happens for touring Broadway in terms of our gross revenue. Well, Mean Girls does just fine. Frozen does just fine. And now we have this underdog, The Band's Visit, that has been validated of this is amazing and you should see it. And now we have 3 shows on subscription that are going to market that people want to gravitate towards. So from a business perspective and a creative perspective, which for me, the business thing is not my personal feelings. I believe that that's the economics of the business. But from a conceptual standpoint and a storytelling, which was the best story, to me, I think that's the band's visit. That's who I'm throwing my vote, behind this year.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because I just saw Bright Star in Connecticut a few days ago, and that didn't win when it came out, same season as Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
Great show, though. I liked it. It was really great. And the people, I was talking to some of the cast members, and they were saying it's the first night, it's like, not many people. And then if they're in town for a while, the word travels fast because it's a good show.
So what are data points? We talked about reading to think about technology points and people. With show data points, it's about seeing shows and going what works and doesn't. And so without getting into specifics, by 2 minutes into the second number in Bright Star, I immediately felt that show isn't going to make it in New York. Structurally, it's no.
Yeah, they were saying do not use the word bluegrass.
A lot of other reasons, though. A lot of other reasons. But, it's like there is a formula to storytelling, and you can tell whatever story you want, but there are formulas to tell. And it starts at the broad strokes of how you structure a story, how you reveal characters, how many primary and secondary characters you have, right? Your leads and then your supporting. That help drive story forward. You can have the relationship, but also a sub relationship, Yeah,
and then once you see that show, you realize how come these two people are not related at all, but we're learning about this other person. It must tie together.
Or
in
how
some
come
way.
someone's just sung an Act 2 ballad in the second song in the show? We don't even know who you are yet, so we can't identify with your journey. How can we struggle with you and empathize with you as an audience if we don't even know who the heck you are? We haven't even spent 45 minutes with you. Yeah. Too soon.
Too soon. Too soon, my friend. Too soon. Yeah. I brought up that question from the New York Post because, I would assume this looks like more or less a bit of the future with films coming to
It could be.
the stage.
It's great, I have read numerous times since I moved to New York that, Broadway as we know it is dead, or Broadway as we know it is dying. And what it is that we're not dead or dying. We just continue to evolve, and we'll learn from that evolution. And so, if you're, Viacom or your NBC Universal or your any of the other large media companies, I think that you're alluding to that might be coming in and developing product.
Yes, I am.
Well, I think surround yourself with people that know how to or are experienced in this medium of storytelling, because if you listen to guys like Alex Lacamoire talk about how he orchestrates, and when there should be repetition in the orchestration that creates a memory for the audience, that maybe even a different character is singing, but that character has an attachment to another character, and they're not even on the stage at the same time, it does something to you. And you need
especially
to,
when you notice
before you even write the music, you need to understand that, right? And it's you can't go to calculus till you've done algebra kind of, analogy that you need to know the fundamentals. And so, I think the media companies, there was a show that closed last year that didn't run very long. That was from a large media company, a lot of money put in, and I talked to people around that process, and they said too many cooks in the kitchen and too many people, from California, really wanting to be at the center of the table. And the thing is, if you own the content, you already have the right. You're at the center of the table. Hire the right people. Surround yourself with the right people that can help you better understand this format of storytelling. So I think we'll learn that the shows that don't take that time and rush things to market, or rather just don't have teams around them that create content that resonates, well, they'll open because they'll have the money to be able to create access, and then they won't stick around very long, and they'll figure out what they want to do with it. The good stuff, though, will stick.
Yeah, it always does. When it comes to consulting, are there common pitfalls or mistakes that you see when consulting someone or a company or a production? And I asked this question because last time we talked, you brought up a good question about people don't know what to ask for. And you were like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. You think about what you want to ask me. And he came back and he said, introduce me to rich people. And you're like, you're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
So that's just so you know my train of thought. That's what inspires this further conversation. Curious, though, if there are mistakes or pitfalls that you see.
Well, I think, the first thing is having an honest conversation with ourselves about what do we want to do, and how do we add value. The what do we want to do first is that eventually we're going to tell someone else and someone else and someone else, and we should have a relatively high degree of confidence that the thing that we want to do, that we are capable of doing, or have a willingness to work really hard to become effective at doing that. And and then the second side of that is that as you begin to communicate that to people, be really honest with yourself about the kind of feedback that you're getting. So like listen, right? Because if I'm in a room and I'm talking to somebody and I'm just telling them what I want them to know, this is what I want them to know about what I'm working on, it's a very high chance that I'll leave that interaction and I'll have missed some things that were critical feedback. And if my agenda is just to like, I need to meet with 10 people and tell them what's on my mind, what should happen is when I meet with a second person, I tell them what I'm thinking about, but then I've also been able to layer in a little bit from what I learned from the first meeting. By the third meeting, I've now got resources of 2 people I've met with that I can add to what I'm thinking and can continually shape that. And so I think like from the consulting side is when I see people fail to evolve and they know that they should, but they don't, because evolution is hard. The reason for that is we oftentimes feel like we don't have time. We don't have time to do it. It's like if I'm going to use a new platform, or if I'm going to, go from like paper to digital or something like that, it's like you actually have to, just like learning a language or anything else, dedicate the time to like picking up on those methodologies for the betterment of the eventual result is that you're going to be able to do your work better. Or maybe because you dedicate yourself to really listening when you talk to people, that you're then going to be a more effective communicator. You'll actually be a better speaker because you listened, right? And so for me, I'll meet with people and they'll say, I really feel like this is the time I should be doing this. I'm like really passionate about this, but I'm just not setting aside enough hours in a week to like dedicate to like, getting better at that thing, and it's, how else can you respond than, say like, well, what are you doing about that? And it's the first step is hearing that person say that. And then it's, well, what are you doing about that? And what will it look like if you don't? That's a big one. Because it's like, well, I fall behind my peers. Will the company that I'm running, that I'm working 80 hours a week on, actually like 3 years from now, just like find out it's no longer relevant? And that happens. It happens in other industries. It's happening in ours too. So the pitfalls are like failure to be honest with yourself, failure to review and assess the marketplace for what it really is instead of what you want it to be. You're allowed to think about where you'd like to help take it, but you cannot ignore if someone pitches me an idea and I say, who are your competitors? And they say, no one. If I know of competitors, I'll say, is it possible that the following could potentially be competitors, right. Or that they're supplying like a couple of the things you're talking about, and collectively 5 different companies are supplying all the things you're talking about. They're just spread out and you're not. And if the person refuses to acknowledge that, they're welcome to continue on their journey, but I know that I won't self-select to participate in their journey, because we have to be honest with each other, and we have to be open to being told that our ideas, that there's someone else working on them, and then go, okay, well, what does that mean to me?
Right. Where do you cultivate these questions? Because you ask really good questions. You're not just asking the positive questions, you're asking the negative questions, which are more often than not more important. Even like with military strategy or even business, it's like, what are our fail points? Where are we going to fail? Yep. Because then we can ultimately win, because we have covered what we believe are all the bases of failing. Is that just learned, or is that, you're always learning, but is that kind of where that comes from?
Well, I study a lot, and if I'm running or if I'm at the gym, I'm listening to a podcast, maybe 30% 20% people that are in our industry and the other not. I'm looking for people that, are leaders that have reached a point of maybe they're in like, the second or third phase of their life and are being reflective. And it's like, all right, well, what can I learn from their experiences? And then I cherry pick. I cherry pick what I think, could be useful for my own life experience. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So as we're getting down to the end here, I wanted to cover, we'll cover the two more things. So I want to get to the books.
Okay.
And I also want to talk right before that, important, like good business principles.
Good business principles.
Yeah. Good principles in business, however you want to word it. Anything that comes to mind, things you're like, you know what, people should know more about this. Mm-hmm. Does anything come to mind?
The most important thing to me, and I've received feedback about this, reaffirming, is that being honest and trustworthy. I can't stress enough the importance of that. I don't know what other industries are like in this respect from a leadership standpoint, but there are people that are fast talkers, and are not transparent. My rule with founders and with staff is that when we're interviewing for a job, whether we are on either side of the table or you are pitching a product to me or I'm pitching a product to you, there is going to be some salesmanship involved. We're going to be selling each other on the idea of either the individual or the individual and the idea. But once there is an agreement to proceed together, a rule that I have is no more pitching allowed. You can't pitch to me. You have to be transparent. If you think the business is struggling, if you think you're struggling, we have to talk about it because we can't see our way through anything if we're not honest about where we are. And so if you are a general manager, if you are a producer, well, you're gonna raise the money and eventually you'll get yourself to an opening night. But in between that is going to be hours and hours of phone calls, in-person meetings, one-on-one with people, production meetings that involve sometimes, ad teams, sometimes, physical production teams, your co-producers. And it shouldn't be like exciting all the time. It should be going, what are the most important things to us? What do we need to accomplish, in the next couple of days before we meet again and come up with a new list. And you can't do that if you haven't made a commitment to each other to be really honest about where everybody feels we are at that point so that we can figure out where to go forward. And that includes like feedback that you're getting outside of the room too. So I'm thankful that up to this point in my career that, I believe that I've, created relationships and I hope, and, I guess I'll say beyond hope, I've been told that like I've established a relationship with, industry professionals that, people feel that they can, sit in a room with me, talk to me about their project. And it's not going to go beyond that room other than the agenda points we've agreed we need to do. I'm not in the gossip business. I'm not in the, telling stories about what's going on behind the scenes business. I'm in the business of helping, take a story to stage and all that's around that. And people need to trust that you have their best intentions and the product's best intentions in mind while you're doing that.
Yeah. That's a good answer.
Thanks.
I was just going to say that. Okay, so we'll end it here with books.
Okay.
Ones you're reading, ones you've read, ones that mean a lot to you.
All right. So I will let me break this down into a couple categories, like for the Broadway business.
Great.
So this like people that want to go into like producing, general management, maybe even you want to be a lawyer that does entertainment law. Anything by Donald Farber. So so he was a theater, film, and entertainment attorney. And Don Farber, he wrote several books that cover the business. And so it's like all the way from like raising money through, like your show's open and then what do you do with it? And I found those to be good resources. Like they're academic, you know what I mean? But if you want to be on the business side, study the academia, right? General management, like I just read this book called Broadway General Manager by Peter Boiggio, and it's also very academic. Like, he has examples of contracts and budgets and things like that. So it's not a tell-all by any means. And so like a lot of people would read that book, most people actually, and be like, oh my God, this is so boring. But people that are wanting to be on the business side and understand, like, what does a long form agreement look like with an author, or what does an actor's contract look like that's like boilerplate versus like a star contract that has like a bunch of additional stuff in it. Well, he has examples of all of that in his book. So like for me, like all of that is stuff that I am like not reading new information when I'm reading it today, but 18-year-old me would be like, wow, I am really learning a lot about how to prepare myself for maybe an internship or an entry-level position in a general manager or producer's office. So Michael Riedel's book, so this is on a very different side, but Razzle Dazzle, the power behind the scenes, like dating back to like the inception of Broadway. I really enjoyed it because it talks about, how Broadway even came to be, and where we are today and everything in between. And it really talks about like the power players. I just really enjoyed that book. There's a lot of great books that focus on specific shows or authors, and this really captures like the business of the industry in New York City. So I thought it was really exciting. Let's see, producer memoirs. There's a guy named Cy Feuer. Okay, so he wrote a book called "I Got the Show Right Here." And he and his business partner, Ernie Martin, like they produce like Guys and Dolls, How to Succeed, Cabaret, Chorus Line, Sound of Music. Like they discovered Julie Andrews when she was like 17 years old. Like they went to like meet with she and her mother in a small town, in England. And just really endearing stories about what it was like to produce Broadway shows like back in the 70s, having grown up in like, the generation before that. So they came of age to be producers in the 70s and maybe a little earlier actually, but he just comes off as like a really decent human being that really, really loved theater. So I enjoyed that. A couple more. You got time for a couple more?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So there's the best book I think on Stephen Sondheim is called Stephen Sondheim, A Life. And it's by Meryl Seacrest. And I mean, he had such an interesting, like he had a financially privileged, but like really troubled childhood. Like he was neglected by his parents. His parents made money in the garment district, but he got sent off to military school, which he ended up actually saying, in this book that he really liked. But this is like a really thorough biography of Stephen Sondheim. Looking at him, today, still being in the industry, when we interact with people when they are already successful, I enjoy going back through stories like that to go, well, what was it like when they were my age or when they were, in high school or whatever? Like, where were they in their careers?
Yeah, what were they doing?
Yeah. I'll give you like just a couple more.
Keep going.
Cool.
No, please. Yeah, you're fine.
All right, so these are like related, but not like Broadway, but kind of related. There's a book called The Operator by Tom King, and that is about David Geffen, the music producer. And that's like, it's a interesting and also like kind of cautionary book about, power and success and, power and values and what we do to get money, and, a mentor of David is a guy named Amit Erdogan. I don't know. I mean, I hopefully won't, lose an opportunity by saying this, but I think I'd rather gravitate more towards being an Amit Erdogan than a David Geffen. But David Geffen is wildly successful, and he is partially responsible for like the music catalogs that our parents grew up on. And I think about that, and I know some producers in the Broadway industry too that it's like, Is it the chicken or the egg? Like, do you become like the powerful, telling everyone what to do, wielding your power producer, because you're born that way, or because you realize that you're working in an industry where there are so many egos, everyone is so spread out working on so many things that if you don't like command the center of attention, then, you know, you're not going to get your product to market. And this, just to be clear, like has nothing to do with like any of the stuff going on with like, you know, sexual kinds of things. I'm speaking strictly like just in business prowess.
Yeah.
Another book.
Yeah.
So Bernie Brillstein, who is an entertainment manager, he's got a book called Where Did I Go Right? And it's hilarious. You know, he and Brad Gray, who they had, when Brad Gray approached Bernie Brillstein to create Brillstein Gray, they were 26 years apart, and wow. Brad was, basically said, I'm young and dangerous and you're smart and connected, and like our powers together, like we can do great things. And Bernie, like that book, he just has so many great like one-liners in there, about like what it's like actually working in management in the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. So I enjoyed that. Okay. Those are a couple books.
I love it. Oh,
Yeah.
These are great. I love a good reading list. So, all right, here we go. Okay, perfect. And of course, I'll put these in the show notes as well for the listeners. Yeah. Townsend Teague, everyone.
It always goes by fast. Like an hour is just like...
It's insane in a New York minute. Is there anything else that you want to touch on? Any asks or anything you want to reach out to anyone prior to us ending this? Also, recap on where we can find you.
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And on Twitter.
Beautiful.
And it's just Townsend Teague.
Love it.
Yeah.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Yeah.
Townsend, thank you so much for taking
you.
another hour out of your already scheduled life.
It was fantastic.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Entertainment X, the podcast. You can follow Entertainment X on Instagram at _EntertainmentX_. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join Clay next week for another curiosity conversation on Entertainment X. Thank you for listening.